Namaskar. Today is June 7th, Monday, and welcome to Daily Global Insights. I'm your host, Sri Iyer, and joining me is Sridhar Chityalaji. Sridharji, Namaskar, and welcome to P Guru's channel. Why don't we start with the first news item on United States, sir? President Biden says he stands by Israel despite pressure from his progressives. What are your thoughts, sir?
Namaskar. Good morning to everybody. We kick off another week, and we're looking forward to another exciting week with lots of events unfolding as we move into the week. I think it's just his reaffirmation. There was too much of noise going on in the system around by the progressives against the support for Israel. Plus, there was also attempts to block the money that was being sent for protection of the dome, which mitigated many of the rockets flying from Gaza. So it was good on the part of Mr. Biden to step up and say, hey, we have a defense partnership for the protection, and this is historical relationship between the United States and Israel. You progressives, you just need to tone down the rhetoric.
And the storm is brewing for Dr. Fauci's resignation and for more comprehensive investigation with more email leaks. Almost 2,000 emails a day from Fauci. That is amazing, sir. How can somebody have 2,000 mails being sent every day? And that also shows you how little US knew in the early days of pandemic about what was going on.
Well, I think there is a chorus growing from either side of the party. For surprise, there's both left as well as the right media houses, mainstream media houses, now citing and publishing all this data. It's obvious that the world is suffering. There is no left or right. The world is suffering as a result of this pandemic. So people have an anxiety to get behind. If there has been 2,000 emails, as is alleged over the weekend, based on the evidence that is coming out slowly, or information that is being released slowly, if that's the case, then it's a worrying sign as to such a major event. Right in the middle of that event, there's a lot of activity going on, and nobody is aware. And Dr. Fauci is supposed to be the guiding father or the guiding mentor, not just for United States but for around the world on this pandemic. So it's extremely worrying. Whether typically in the Beltway fashion, whether this investigation will be suppressed or whether this would, move into a much more actionable outcome in terms of who the guilty people are and whether China will be eventually made accountable for whatever has happened remains to be seen. But I'm very skeptical that there would be anything coming out of it.
And Trump is back, and in his first public address in a fiery speech, slams New York probe, Biden, Fauci, and China. Speaker Donald Trump, an interesting idea, says Trump. This would be a first, I think. I don't think any sitting president went on to become the Speaker of the Congress, sir.
Yes, indeed. Firstly, he was in North Carolina, in Greenville, addressing the NCGOP summit. And there's also a Senate race for the Senate nominations are going on. He was quite vocal in terms of the New York probe by Mr. Vance and rest of the crew. He said it's political and it's subjective, it's biased. I think that the evidence is already coming out. That seems to be the case. Then he took on Biden on the various policies of Biden, right from China to immigration to tax to various policies that he is enacting, which is going to take United States backward. He has been vocal on Fauci right from the days they were sitting side by side during his last year of the administration. So he took on, and obviously, China is his favorite topic. He remains the only president who took China head on. So therefore, all these things propped up. One of the ideas that is being mooted is whether President Biden can become House Speaker Biden. And not only bring House.
Sorry, you meant Trump. So you meant Trump.
Yeah, President Trump. Yeah, whether President Trump can become the House Speaker, and he would he could go ahead and impeach a few people through the House process. This was in an interview with, I think, Frank Allen Root, the Republican conservative radio host. In the radio interview, this topic was presented whether he should consider running for a House seat from Florida and be nominated by the Republican House to be the Speaker. So he said it's an intriguing idea. Intriguing ideas often probably results in some kind of a tangible outcome. So let's wait and see.
Yes, indeed. And it's got an interesting connotation there in the sense that that also assumes that the Republicans will be able to secure a majority in the Congress. Because if that doesn't happen and if Trump will get elected, I don't think I have any doubts about that. He can always cherry pick the constituency like the way Ilhan Omar does, like the way AOC does, like the way Pramila Jaipal does. I bet you every one of you guys, you will not be able to get the adjacent constituency, you won't be able to win. But that's a matter for a different day and a different time. Biden rejects Caputo infrastructure proposal and likely to meet again on Monday. Manchin going it alone would hurt the Democrats because they would not even be able to get a simple majority, isn't it?
Well, I think as far as Manchin is concerned, he's saying, we have had disastrous Obamacare. You remember it was most partisan, both on the Senate as well as the House side. It has floundered, forward and backward. So some bipartisan support would make it a meaningful proposition, especially the infrastructure funding program or climate accord or any of these things. So there's a continuity. This is about the thing that you raised, which is, you go on one regime comes in, you go extreme left on policies, then another regime comes in, then you move extreme right. In the process, we are not moving the agenda forward. So I think Manchin is right. He's saying, let's try and see whether we can build a consensus around it. As far as the infrastructure plan, it's going forward, backward, 550 versus 2.25, then 1.75 Biden, and then, 550 went from 560 went to 750, then it went up to trillion. And Biden has basically said the proposal is unacceptable. And Ms. Caputo is the nominated Senate representative to negotiate with Biden. It doesn't look like it's going to converge. And potentially we'll know this week before Wednesday, before President leaves on his trip, what's going to happen to this infrastructure proposal.
And three senators of the United States will be visiting Taiwan, and the visit is likely to irritate the Chinese Communist Party. Anything, even you say the word Taiwan and they get irritated, no surprises there, sir.
There's no surprises at all. I think so. You have still the occasionally the U.S. trips, the U.S. Carriers passing by the Taiwan Strait. You have had Army go in and help them. You also have the vaccines. 750,000 vaccines were sent from United States. Japan has sent the vaccines. United States supported Taiwan attending the WHO. China opposed, so they got out of it. So Taiwan has been a source of irritant for China in terms of both Japan, Korea less, but Japan and U.S. Engagement. Having said that, they have been very quiet in the recent past around their rhetorics around Taiwan. But this visit will certainly rake up the issue.
Vice President Kamala Harris leaves for Mexico and Guatemala on a 2-day visit to discuss the root causes of illegal migration. I thought the Beltway experts would have all the information, sir.
Well, there is this perceived view of at least Madam Harris and maybe some of our progressives that if you give them developmental money and build infrastructure and build capabilities and jobs around the Central Asian states of El Salvador, Guatemala, and even adjacent Mexico, they believe that they would this bleeding would stop, or the surge of the illegal migrants would stop. Far from it. So she's going to get a first-hand assessment, as if she has not had before, by directly meeting with the leaders of Guatemala. I think she's almost, we should hear more as the day progresses. The outcome of our discussions yesterday. She's supposed to finish and land this morning or later this afternoon into Mexico and conclude her discussions. But this is the objective. If you recall, she had a telephone conversation and she had committed 300 to 400 million, if I remember the numbers correctly, of developmental budget programs for the Central Asia.
And President Biden will also be leaving on Wednesday for his first overseas trip. I think you mentioned this just a short while ago, to attend the G7 summit in Cornwall in United Kingdom, and on the way meet NATO leaders in Belgium and meeting with Turkey President Erdogan and with Vladimir Putin in Geneva. Quite a bit on his plate, sir.
Indeed. So this is a week of visits. So we'll hear more. We have the senators going to Taiwan. We have Vice President left on yesterday to the Central Asia. Now Biden. So Biden will leave on Wednesday. So he leaves on Wednesday, 9th. He stops in Belgium, where he will address and meet with the NATO leaders. He will meet with some of the EU representatives. Then from there, prior to going to Cornwall, or after the Cornwall, which is 11th to 13th, is the G7 meet. Climate and COVID and this global minimum tax, corporate minimum tax, are all topics that are likely to be discussed at the G7 meet. And it was supposed to be G7 plus 3 or G7 plus 4, the 4 being South Africa, India, Korea, and there was one more, Australia. These were the 4 countries, but India is unlikely to visit. They will probably do a virtual summit. I don't know whether the rest of the people are coming because of the COVID circumstances, but this was supposed to be a very important meet. Then he veers his way. They have a meeting with Mr. Erdogan. It'll be interesting to see what the scope of the discussion of that particular meet. Whether Armenia figures in that discussions remains to be seen. Then he comes to Geneva to meet with Mr. Vladimir Putin on the 16th of June. We announced it in DGI, and then he makes his way back.
And let's now take a look at things happening around India. India's foreign exchange reserves may have already crossed USD 600 billion, providing it the much needed confidence to deal with any potential global challenges. I think what we are mentioning here is the possible threat from China.
I think that at least we can look at 3. If the pandemic expands and economies begin to shut down, then India must be able to, whatever it needs to import, must be capable of importing. So there is sufficient balance in the account. In the event of a threat, which looks very, very highly likely, then it has the capacity to absorb that. Today, India is a net creditor rather than a net debtor. India's outstanding overseas or private debt is about $540 billion or $540 to $560 billion, depending on the exchange rates. And so it is $600 billion gives it the net surplus in terms of the reserves. So the Reserve Bank's governor is extremely happy, and he issued a statement, our calculations are delayed. We may have already crossed 600 billion. To me, it is excellent that India has, during the 7 years of Modi's tenure, India's foreign exchange reserve has almost doubled from $300 billion to $600 billion. It makes a huge difference.
India and Australia are discussing the reopening of Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, CECA, to expand bilateral trade from 15 billion in 2021. India exports about 4 billion while importing 8.25 billion from Australia. I take it back. I think they are trying to take it to 15 billion in sometime in the future. Perhaps you can expand on this.
So this plus or minus, again, the 15 billion number, comes up based on the volatility, and sometimes you have a spurt in trade. You eliminate one off. For example, you have COVID vaccines, right? So COVID vaccines is not imported on an annual basis, whereas it is one off. So this is where that rough 15 billion comes up. But the exports are 405 billion on a normalized basis. Imports are 8.25 billion USD on a normalized basis. So the goal for them is to really expand this by removing tariffs and barriers. For example, India has tariffs and barriers on agro products and dairy products. Australia is a big exporter of dairy and agro products. So Some of these things would become the scope of the discussion. It's critical for Australia. Australia is trying to decouple from China. It is important for India because India is building what we call as a portfolio of countries to augment its bilateral trade and bilateral trade to grow to about $500 billion or $1 trillion as time passes on. So it doesn't want to be asymmetric. 150, 160 billion dollars from United States, and then about 80 or 70 billion dollars from China. So you can see that we covered it already. That there is a free trade agreement and investment agreement as two separate packages. They're working with the EU. They're working with the UK to build a bilateral free trade agreement. They're now working with Australia for a free trade agreement. They have free trade agreements with West Asian nations. Of course, they have free trade agreements with ASEAN countries and as well as bilateral with Japan, Korea. The whole objective of this is to build a portfolio of capabilities, and India is also now expanding into manufacturing and more refining and various range of products, mobiles, alternate energy like solar. So I think especially it becomes very relevant and helpful in these trying times when domestic consumption is constrained. This is where the exports help in terms of augmenting the GDP of the economy.
An Indian social media company Koo gets a major shot for global expansion with service in Nigeria. Those of you who are following the spat between Twitter and many countries may know that Nigeria, upon its president being cancelled from Twitter, has actually shut down the service in Nigeria. Maybe Nigeria, that's why Nigeria is looking at Koo. And India is still thinking about how to respond back for what Twitter did. There is going to be a separate 5-minute talk from me on this one. It'll come on P-Guru shortly. So your thoughts?
Well, I think the fact that Koo is now is planning to be in Nigeria is the expected movement of Koo to be an alternate player competing with Twitter. So therefore, to your point, what India is going to do. India has issued, I think, the final show cause or final compliance notification, which is to say either comply or get out. That's the final notice that's been sent to Twitter. Twitter may, comply, or Twitter may choose not to comply. It remains to be seen. I would be very surprised, given that Facebook has complied, Alphabet has complied. Apple, is technically compliant because it's not in this space. So my impressions are that, Twitter may concede ground and basically tell, okay, we'll follow the rules. Over the weekend, some of the members, this RSS leader, the vice president, some of their apparently, Twitter handles got certification or the tick light symbol, which is effectively to say that, they are on. So in my view, that's not going to stop Koo from emerging, because there are going to be emerging platforms that's going to lay siege to some of these media companies which have tripped themselves into territories which is not their jurisdiction.
Some of the things that Twitter has done in the past are just downright ridiculous, sir. About a few years ago, they had a CEO called Raheel Khurshid. This guy used to give a tick mark to people with 10 followers, 15 followers, and amazingly belonging to one section of the society in India, and the others had to sweat it through. I am a best-selling author on Amazon for several weeks and I still haven't got the tick mark. I'm not going to go asking them for it. I'm going to find out what else I can do with this. What I'm trying to say is this whole thing about how Twitter handles things is very subjective. They have their own mind. Sometimes this mind goes into places that it should not be going into. I can go on a rant forever. Here, let's go on to the next news, sir. Brazilian health regulator approves exceptional import of Bharat Biotech's Covaxin vaccine. So this vaccine product is now getting respectability across the world, especially in its ability to counter some of the mutants, isn't it?
It is, and also I think it's homegrown from India, so India is looking at as an alternate. It has very soon, I think it's almost well on its way to get the WHO approval, and it's not, Covaxin is not reliant on APIs from overseas. and most of it I believe, is homegrown in India. And vaccine is going to be one of the driving factors as you look at next 4, 5, 6 years, as the world combats not just COVID, but integrates COVID into mainstream other viruses for which vaccines are taken on a periodic basis. We also don't know what else is to come. If this is all a lab experiment, what more to come? They apparently have got one other virus, of which one person has been detected to have it, and then he has died in China. So how many people contacted and how many deaths we don't know, but at least there is a next virus starting with the word the alphabet H, HN103 or some such number. So more to come. So this vaccine is going to become an integral part of our life.
And Hyderabad-based Biological E, it's the name of a company, I think, has an upcoming COVID-19 vaccine called Corbevax, Corbevax, could become the cheapest or most affordable vaccine, perhaps priced below rupees 400. This is a new company, I think, sir. Your thoughts?
There's a new company which is based out of Hyderabad. Hyderabad is the epicenter of biomedical research. Hyderabad, Pune is another place which seems to be the epicenter of the biotech research. And there are a number of companies coming out of both public and private companies coming out of these two cities is quite amazing. This vaccine, they are saying that they're going to price it somewhere between 300 to 400 rupees, per vaccination. Whether there are 2 doses or 1 dose, the details are not known as yet. But if it is 300 to 400 rupees, then I think they're just going to bring the cost of this quite dramatically. My view is this is the reason why the Pfizers and Pfizer-BioNTechs and Eli Lilly's and Johnson & Johnson's of the world are afraid that they want to be in a place where there is a volume. Because if there is price elasticity, they have the volume to cover up, and price elasticity is going to be inevitable. If somebody is going to have an annual vaccination program and consumption of close to 2 to 3 billion doses. The reason why I put 2 to 3 billion doses is when you take a nucleus of people of India, South Asia, Africa, and even Southeast Asian adjacent nations, you're talking about 2-dose vaccines. It's a huge number, the sheer dosage that is required.
And in global news, in a significant development, G7 nations arrive at a landmark deal to tax tech giants like Facebook, Google, and Amazon. Major nations support a global minimum tax rate of 15% for global majors operating from various offshore destinations. Does this mean a death knell for tax inversion, sir?
It means potential death knell for tax havens. If you're operating and if you're established in, let's say, in Guernsey or Cayman Islands or any of these places, it doesn't matter because you are headquarters or you are a U.S. company, and being a U.S. company, you pay a tax. Doesn't matter where you earn income from. It has received wide support from the G7 countries. The Chancellor for the Exchequer for UK came out and issued a public statement to state, look, it's high time. This has not been reformed and it's long overdue. So there has to be harmonization. So most of the countries are, when you look at the 0% countries, no big name except the tax havens, and then you have the less than 10%. Again, you have a combination of Eastern European and to some extent the Latin American countries. Then you go into 20% plus. Germany tops the list, and then you have most of them are in the 25 to 35% tax rates. This is primarily directed at the tax havens which operate from Europe and also the Caribbean. United States has a corporate tax rate of 21%, which Biden wants to take it to 28%. So I think that this is a good move, and the G7, the fact that the G7 have acceded to this is a great victory for Janet Yellen and to Biden administration who have been advocating this model.
There you go. We just praised the Democrats. So I think this is for all those naysayers who say that we carry a brief for the Republicans. Putin says, don't spoil Russia-UK partnership after MI6 criticism. Who criticized the MI6?
No, MI6 criticized Russia for its covert and other types of activities. There's always been the tug of war between the Russians as well as the MI6 in Britain. So they're saying don't feed bad information to the British government. Some of it may be true, some of it may not be true, but we really would like to normalize the relationship with UK. But remember, there's a lot of Russian Tsar wealth in UK still, right? So therefore, old wealth is still in UK. So I think UK is saying if Germany is normalizing, if they want to have Nord Stream 2 flowing into Europe, hey, why are you hurting UK? Right? Why should we be denied, our fair share of contribution from the Russians? I think that seems to be the underlying motive.
Well, at P Gurus, we have tomes and tomes of data about how Britain is the takeoff point for money going into tax havens. So Britain is the one that's going to be turning off the spigot, in my opinion. So let's wait and see how this plays out. I expect some pushback. Anyway, that's just me and the skeptic in me. Israel's domestic security warns of violence as the country faces the prospect of a Netanyahu unseating. We talked about this last week, that Naftali Bennett could be the new Prime Minister of Israel, but it's a very unusual combination. There are already talks about one of his perceived partners having second thoughts. Sir, what is the latest on this? Is Bibi going to be dethroned or is he going to continue?
12 days time has been given to the coalition, so they have time. I think 3 days have elapsed. So there's 9 more days. There is still people believe that Netanyahu may spring a surprise by the time it comes to voting and establishing the majority in the Israeli parliament. And, in anticipation that should Bibi be unseated, which is very likely at this stage, they expect lots of trouble brewing. So clashes and maybe more rockets getting fired from Gaza, notwithstanding the truce discussions that's happening between Egypt and the Hamas leaders in Gaza. It remains to be seen whether there would be quietness or there should be more belligerence and as a result violence. I think that's what the Israeli intelligence are warning.
Last week we talked about China's incursion into Malaysian airspace. China ships sailed near Senkaku Island for the 112th day in succession. China also rotates 90% of its troops in the Ladakh Valley. So China is keeping itself busy. The rest of the world is also beginning to respond to this. Where is this leading, sir?
July 1st. It's leading to July 1st or July 1st week when Mr. Xi Jinping will be anointed. They have the major communist CCP Congress event is supposed to announce the next phase of their strategy in terms of way and how China will be the global, superpower, occupying Belt and Roads, occupying, various sports, rising as a technology power with AI and robots, with space, defense, etc. So he's going to unveil the further expansion of his plan and program to cement Chinese place in the not only the economic but the economic and political history. So all these things that are happening is a continued activity towards that. Senkaku is because Japan has been raising issues not only on Taiwan but has also been questioning some of the border stuff in partnership with the United States. Japan has also irritated China by sending vaccines and money to Taiwan. So these are some of the things. As far as India is concerned, you all are aware that India is a constant thought for China. So there's no love lost between the two, unless it is not a Modi government. The reason why this turnover has been reported is that apparently most of the 50,000 people or so deployed there suffered from a lot of these cold and adverse conditions. And so they explicitly made it a point to say, we have fresh legs on the ground. what about you, India? So India says, we also have fresh legs on the ground and we rotate troops once in 2 years. We are well aware of the terrain. So there is this what you call game going on in South China Sea and as well as in the Himalayan kingdom.
And as a corollary to that, they are sitting down for the 12th round of talks very, very shortly, India and China. And one wonders what's going to be discussed more than the chai pani stuff. So we'll wait and see. US and Japan to pledge billions of dollars to COVAX to combat China vaccine diplomacy. United States will supply 750,000 doses of vaccine to Taiwan. So now we are seeing that Taiwan is experiencing a big shortage of vaccine, and all the other countries such as United States, Japan are rushing to fill that need. I'm hoping that India will again get its vaccine supply scheme back together, supply chain back together, so that they can start participating in some of these things. Your thoughts on whether India can be the most reliable and most cost-effective supplier?
India will emerge as the cost-effective supplier once it goes more domestic based supply chain rather than a globally reliant API based program. The reasons are that they are subjected to the vagaries of the political systems that prevail. So, in my humble view, that I think India will evolve itself to be, they already are the largest vaccine producer and supplier in the world. India produces the largest set of vaccines. So therefore, I think largest doses of vaccines. So that's the India question. As far as Taiwan is concerned, they are quite desperate. The cases began to grow up. 750,000 is the number that you mentioned. I think Japan gave them funds, not vaccine, because Japan itself is short of vaccines to meet its own obligations, and they have been ramping up. So Taiwan has received help. Whether India will help Taiwan remains to be seen. Can't see it in the immediate future, but once the Sputnik vaccine gets into play, once J&J and the Eli Lilly's vaccine gets into play, now the Covaxin is getting into play, you may begin to see India providing more vaccines to some of the emergent or some of the emergency needs of nations which are in a very desperate situation.
And Al Qaeda leadership is well in place and residing in the Afghan Pakistan border region, including Ayman al Zawahiri. Sir, I thought al Zawahiri was eliminated a few years back.
The latest reports indicate he's very much alive. See, in Pakistan, Afghanistan theater, it's always a drama. So, who is alive and who is dead on any given day, remains a mystery. The fact that they are intact, whether he is Ayman al-Zawahiri or whether he is a duplicate, we will not know but certainly the intelligence is stating that, it's intact. Now, why this news is relevant? Because the United States is pulling out at a rapidity, and many people are concerned what is going to happen to the security apparatus in Afghanistan as a result. But these are great questions. Afghan has never had a solution in almost 50, 60, 70 years. It has always had tremendous amount of problems because of whatever the nature of the ecosystem that's prevalent in that part of the world.
Sir, I'm also reading now that the United States is perhaps going to leave behind about 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. It's not going to be a complete pullout.
I think the 2,500 number is special forces. Who are these special forces? Don't know. There's another rumor that is floating around, which is to say that the United States is also contemplating, bases in adjacent countries. It is looking out for some base. Then I think it made sensation in Pakistan because there was a rumor that they could be finding a couple of bases in Pakistan, which prompted the Pakistani government to say, no, we're not going to have any bases of United States within our country. So there's lot to be lot of questions rather than any specific answers. It's all part of the speculation that goes on when you have a major pullout.
And in markets, El Salvador is likely to become the first country to accept Bitcoin as legal tender. Is there any truth to this statement, sir?
It is. I think that there is very much likely that El Salvador is could emerge as the first country. El Salvador has got a lot of expats, people working all around the world. Most, I mean, not around the world, mostly in United States. If I have to use United States as a world by itself, so the story is that there's a lot of people who work here. And what better way? There's a lot of wire transfer services that go for remittances from El Salvador, from United States into El Salvador. Bitcoin could be a good vehicle for transacting for these people. Many of them do only cash. There's no cards. There's no debit cards. There's not enough debit cards in El Salvador. Either it is cash, or that's why Western Union, once upon a time, which is now part of a much larger enterprise, is an integral part of the wire transfer service in that part of the world.
And higher interest rates would be good for the country, says Janet Yellen. Markets are poised for rally as we look ahead. Why would higher interest rates be good? It would tamp down growth, isn't it?
The higher interest rates would imply that people are not engaged with excess liquidity sitting in their bank accounts, getting into speculative type of activities. So there is a what you call self deterrence that is in place. So people don't do speculative buying as a result of cash and lower rates. So the cash is being dumped by the Biden administration with an intent that would speed up the consumption and keep the economy going. And already we have seen the first casualty of that. What is the first casualty? People are unwilling to come to work. They don't want to come to work because there's money. So you don't want to have people don't wanting to come to work. People reliant on this borrowed cash, borrowed within the balance sheet of the United States. And the third is engaging in speculative activity with no steady income in mind, especially when the rates are low.
And that brings us to a close of today's episode. We'll be back again bright and early tomorrow. Sridharji, as always, a pleasure with talking with you about events in and around the world. Viewer, there are going to be small changes this week as I have some travel commitments. We will keep you posted. We will try and get these episodes out every day. But thanks for listening, and do join in on our Hangouts. Also, subscribe to our channel and consider joining us as a member. Thank you very much, and we'll be back again bright and early tomorrow. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, and looking forward to have a wonderful week. And more exciting news awaits us as all these people make the travel around the world.
Yes,